Two huge storms will be coming to the United States over the next several days, and these two large storms are going to pose another big risk for severe weather, one of which will be today, and then the next one will be Saturday into Sunday, where there will be a chance for a severe weather outbreak, anywhere from the southern plains all the way back into the Ohio Valley and even into the lower Midwest. So in today's forecast, we're going to break down everything that you need to know about these two different large storms that will be impacting the United States over the next 4 days. Let's begin first with today's severe weather threat across the United States, and it is a huge area for tossing trampolines on tall trees Thursday. We have a large marginal threat of severe weather, which is a 1 out of 5 on the severe weather scale, essentially the lowest threat, which goes all the way from the East Coast back into the Great Plains, and really this is a huge area. It covers hundreds of thousands of miles of space here across the country, but really the greatest concern is going to be in the Great Plains today, where a trough ejection will move over the Rocky Mountains, and this will eventually pose a risk for severe weather today and even into tonight and even into Friday morning. It's actually going to be a pretty elongated event, and you'll see why here in just a moment. But we do have an elevated enhanced risk for severe weather in Nebraska, Kansas, and southwest Iowa, where there will be a greater concern for significant damaging winds that could be as high as 75 to 85 miles per hour later today into the evening hours. And then the slight risk, which is going to be kind of broken down into a few different parts. We'll have some isolated thunderstorms back up here in the northern plains that'll produce some large hail and damaging winds. We'll have a tornado risk that'll be elevated across parts of the central plains with a 5% tornado risk in place. And then back over in the southern plains, this will be kind of its own event, where we'll have a few discrete supercells that'll try to fire up in western Oklahoma and even into central and western Kansas later today. And any discrete supercells will be capable of all hazards of severe weather. Meanwhile, a line of storms will push through parts of the central plains in Nebraska, northern Kansas, and back into Iowa. With all that said, we do have an elevated tornado risk, which really goes from Nebraska back into even north central Texas, where there will be a chance for a few tornadoes. I wouldn't rule out a isolated strong tornado, but I think the risk is low enough to the point where they will not add a hatched risk for tornadoes. Even with that said, I don't think the risk of that is that high today. Here's the wind concern, and again, this is really one of the greatest threats for today. We do have a hatched area back over in Nebraska and northern Kansas, where we'll have at least a couple of storms embedded in a line of storms that'll produce the threat for damaging winds that are going to be as high as 85 miles per hour. Now, as we go into Friday, this will basically all be with the same sort of event. We are going to have that line of storms develop later today into tonight. That'll eventually move into the Midwest tomorrow morning, and that is what the majority of this risk will be as we go into Friday. Now, for those back over in like Missouri or even into Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and even into Texas, the threat of severe weather will be a little bit different, with some discrete and semi-discrete cells that have formed later in the day, and those will be primarily just wind and hail producers. It should be pretty ordinary thunderstorms. We may see an isolated tornado or two, but I think the risk overall is going to be relatively low, and this event does not look super concerning, and it does not look like a big outbreak, but I do think we are going to at least have a pretty high likelihood at least of some damaging winds associated with that line of storms back over in the Midwest. Now, the setup for today's event is very different from what we saw from yesterday and even back on Tuesday when we had that tornado outbreak. Notice this from Wednesday evening, which is yesterday. We had that low pressure system back over in the upper Midwest, and this is the one that brought the tornado outbreak on Tuesday. Had a very strong low-level jet that was more centered across areas like Iowa, Wisconsin, and Illinois, where we saw several tornadoes. Now, as we went into yesterday, we also saw that low-level jet try to crank up just a little bit back over in the southern plains, but it wasn't very strong. And we only end up seeing a couple of tornadoes down in areas like Texas, where there was just a slight increase in the low-level jet. It was able to help kind of rotate some storms and ended up producing at least a couple of tornadoes. But today is a bit of a different setup. Now, overall, we are still going to have a low-level jet in place across the central plains, where we will have a chance with any discrete supercells of seeing the potential for a few tornadoes. And this is all due to a low-pressure system that will eject over the Rocky Mountains. Now, with all that said, I do want to point out that the low-level jet is just one of many ingredients that are needed for tornadoes, but in this case, the low-level jet will be definitely cranking just enough this evening to the point where we will have enough of a surge of low-level winds being able to produce the potential for a few tornadoes in the Great Plains. And then eventually, as we go into Friday, we should have just enough as well for maybe a couple of tornadoes back over in areas like Arkansas, maybe even into Illinois, Indiana, and western Kentucky. But overall, the risk on Friday still appears low at this time. Another ingredient that'll be pretty important is the moisture. moisture. You might notice this morning, if you're back over in like Kansas or Nebraska, dew points in the low 50s and upper 40s. It might not feel like a big severe weather day to you, but as we go into the afternoon, we are going to get a strong southerly wind because of that low pressure system that is going to be all the way back up here near Colorado, and that'll be able to basically get all that moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, which is where a lot of this moisture resides, and that'll eventually surge into the central plains this evening, where dew points will quickly jump into the upper 50s and low to mid 60s. Now overall, the upper 50s will not be super supportive of tornadoes back over in Nebraska, but if we do get enough moisture up there with some of those storms, there will be a chance for a couple of tornadoes. And then back over in Oklahoma and Kansas, there will be plenty of buoyancy with dew points into the mid to upper 60s, which will be supportive at least for a few tornadoes as long as storms do develop, which is a question mark for today, especially in areas like Oklahoma and Kansas. Now I'm going to show you two different computer model runs on the future radar for today in the southern plains, and you'll see a big difference. This is the most recent HRRR model run this evening. Notice only one storm is even on the map, which is pretty crazy. Now I don't think we're only going to see one storm here in Kansas and Oklahoma. I think we'll see more than just this one discrete cell, but I do want to point out most of any storms today that develop will be discrete. Here's the HRRR model run from earlier yesterday, which shows you, I think, a bit more of a realistic setup. Right around 3 to 4 o'clock, we'll have some hailstorms and some elevated thunderstorms back over in central Oklahoma and north Texas. Overall, the main concern here will be large hail, but any storms that form right over here in western Oklahoma and even into southern Kansas that remain discrete will have a potential for very large hail, some damaging winds, and then also the potential for a couple of tornadoes. Now, this will probably be a relatively short-lived event, but I do think we'll at least have a shot for that sometime between about 4 and 8 o'clock. I think that'll be the greatest concern time frame for areas like Oklahoma and Kansas. Now, I think the more really substantial threat, the one that's going to be definitely happening, I think, today, will be the one back up in Nebraska and even into South Dakota, where we are going to eventually get a line of storms developing later this evening. That'll be producing a damaging wind, hail, and even an isolated tornado risk. We'll probably at least be live for this event. I'm not sure if we'll be live yet for the discrete supercells. It really depends on if they fire off, and as long as they do, we will be live on the channel, so make sure that you're subscribed to the channel down below. And then as we go into the overnight hours, that line of storms does continue to push east with mainly a scattered damaging wind risk anywhere from Kansas back into Iowa. It's not going to be a full-blown derecho more than likely, but we are going to see some scattered damaging winds with this line of storms, and as well as the chance for a couple of tornadoes, so make sure that you have multiple ways to receive alerts. And then once we hop into Thursday, that area of storms will eventually move into the Midwest. Notice that line pushing in there by the time we go closer to Friday morning, and this is right around 6 a.m., so storms moving into Wisconsin and Illinois, and eventually as we get closer to lunchtime, those storms are pushing into Chicago and western Michigan, where the main concern will be damaging winds and a couple of tornadoes. And eventually as we go into Friday afternoon, those storms do continue to go all the way into areas like Ohio and Indiana, where there will be some more storm activity there. Maybe a second round of storms in the afternoon in Wisconsin. Any of those storms will be primarily a hail threat and also maybe a wind threat as well. And then back over further to the south, we'll have storms ongoing during the morning hours in Missouri. We'll have a much better shot of some more like semi-discrete and robust storms during the afternoon across the southern area of this area of storms, and that could increase the tornado risk just a hair with anything that stays discrete during the afternoon hours. And eventually by the time we get to 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, the main concern will be across Tennessee and Kentucky, with mainly just a wind threat and maybe some hail as well to go along with that, but it doesn't look super substantial overall. Now as we go into the weekend, we are going to get another large storm that is going to eject over the Rocky Mountains and really intensify as we go into both Saturday and Sunday. This is what we're looking at on Sunday, a strong low pressure system, most likely going to be negatively tilted in the upper levels, which will lead to a better shot for severe weather across parts of the Midwest and as well as back into the Ohio Valley. The low-level jet also kind of agrees with the same sort of picture as we go into Saturday into Sunday. An intensifying low pressure system will bring the shot for severe weather back over in areas like the Ohio Valley and as well as back into the lower Midwest, where there will be a shot for a severe weather outbreak. A very strong low-level jet will be in place. We have a lot of veering currently being forecasted, a lot of instability, a lot of buoyancy. It looks like a very prime setup for Sunday for there being a severe weather outbreak in the Ohio Valley. So what does this exactly look like? Well, as we go into Saturday, we are going to have some showers and thunderstorms back over in the Great Plains. We may end up seeing some sort of severe weather outbreak here in the central and southern plains, but things will remain uncertain on that as of right now. By the time we go into Sunday, I think we'll have a much better shot at severe weather. Notice the strong low pressure system, plenty of thunderstorms there across the lower Midwest and the Ohio Valley. We could have on hands a potential severe weather outbreak here in the Ohio Valley. And then as we go into Monday into Tuesday, things will likely quiet down. And I do think the severe weather threat for the remainder of next week after we get past Sunday looks very low overall. We still could have a couple of severe weather events, maybe even a couple of significant ones, but overall it doesn't look like any huge severe weather outbreaks beyond Monday or even Sunday, which is good news. We'll keep you posted with the latest. Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and like the video.